A widowed blacksmith gave a wandering orc stranger shelter for the night, unaware she was the most revered healer in the clans. The forge fire had burned low by the time Edric heard the knock. It was the kind of knock that barely reached the door, 3 soft raps, like a person who half expected to be ignored. He set down his hammer, wiped his hands on a leather cloth, and opened up. The autumn wind came in with a smell of pine and cold rain, and standing in it was the largest woman he had ever seen. She was orc green-skinned, broad-shouldered, with silver-streaked braids tied back from a face that had seen considerable weather. She wore a traveling cloak patched in a dozen places, and a worn satchel hung across one shoulder, its buckle mended with a strip of rawhide. Her boots were soaked through. She stood very still and did not meet his eyes. "I am sorry to trouble you," she said. Her voice was quiet and carefully measured, the voice of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. "I saw your light. I only want to know if there is somewhere dry I might sit until the rain passes. I will not cause trouble. I will be gone before first light." Edric was a practical man. He had spent 20 years at an anvil, and he read people the same way he read iron, by what they were actually made of, not by what they looked like when they first came to hand. What he saw was a woman who was cold and tired and trying very hard not to ask for more than the absolute minimum. He stepped back and held the door open wider. "There's room by the forge," he said. "Supper's already made." She hesitated in the doorway as though she thought he might change his mind. He didn't. He simply walked to the small room at the back of the smithy, where a pot of stew sat warming over a low flame, and he ladled out 2 bowls. Her name was Marin. She told him that much eventually, sitting across the workbench from him with a bowl of venison stew in her big hands. She did not say where she had come from or where she was going. She did not explain the satchel or the worn condition of her cloak, or why, for that matter, she had knocked at a blacksmith's door rather than the inn on the main road. Edric did not ask. He had lived long enough to know that people told you what they needed to tell you in their own time. What he did notice was that when his old dog, Beryl, limped in from the corner and pressed his gray muzzle against her knee, Marin set down her spoon and ran her fingers along the dog's hind leg with the focused, unhurried attention of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. She found the swollen joint just above the ankle without looking. She pressed gently, felt the heat there, and said almost to herself, "Willowbark and chickweed poultice, changed every morning for a week. He will be easier." Edric looked at her. "Are you a healer?" She looked up, and for a moment something moved across her face, a flicker of something careful, almost guarded. Then she said simply, "I know a few things." He did not press. He made up a place for her to sleep near the forge, brought out a dry blanket from the house, and told her to wake him if she needed anything. She thanked him with a gravity that seemed larger than the moment called for, and he went to bed thinking she was probably just a traveler who'd had a run of hard luck. In the morning she was gone. But she had left the forge floor swept clean, the tools he'd set out the evening before arranged in an order that was, he had to admit, more efficient than his own. And on the workbench she had left a small folded square of cloth. Inside it were 3 dried roots and a short note, written in careful, even letters, "For Beryl's leg. The roots are wild comfrey. Boil them down with the poultice and it will hold better. I hope you are well." Yem. Edric stared at that note for a long time. He thought about it again 3 days later when his neighbor, old Pell, came by in a panic, because his wife had taken a fever that none of the local remedies were touching. He thought about it a week after that when the miller's boy broke his arm in a fall, and the nearest proper physician was 2 days' ride in either direction. He thought about it most when he realized that Beryl's leg, treated faithfully with Marin's instructions, had stopped hurting. Then, on a morning 6 weeks after the night she had knocked at his door, Edric looked out his front window and stopped. There were 3 orc women standing at his gate. They were not armed, which was the first thing he noticed. The second thing he noticed was that they were dressed with a formality that sat strangely on the muddy frontier road, deep-dyed wool, embroidered hems, clan beads braided into their hair with a care that said these were not traveling clothes. These were their best. He pulled on his coat and went to the gate, half expecting a complaint about the noise of the hammer or a commission for a new hinge. He was not expecting what he got. The eldest of the three, a woman with iron-white hair and a face like a carved cliff, inclined her head. "You are the blacksmith Edric." "I am." "You gave shelter and supper to our clan's first healer on the night of the autumn storm 6 weeks past." Edric blinked. He thought about the patched cloak, the worn satchel with the rawhide-mended buckle. The 3 quiet knocks. "The woman's name was Marin," he said. "Her full name," said the iron-haired woman, with something that might almost have been amusement, "is Marin of the Ironville clan. She is our first healer. There is no one in 4 valleys who has her knowledge of medicines and wounds. She was returning from a 3-month journey collecting medicines in the northern ranges when the storm caught her. She had been turned away from the inn at your crossroads." Edric was quiet for a moment. "They turned her away," he said. "They did." He thought about the careful knock, the apology before she had even asked for anything, the way she had stood in his doorway, very still, trying to take up as little space as possible. "Well," he said and opened the gate, "come in then. I'll put the kettle on." They came in. He made tea. The first healer's delegation, because that is what they were, he understood now, though the word still felt unlikely in his small, soot-stained kitchen, sat at his table, and told him that Marin had returned to the clan and given her report of the road. They had come to give thanks in the proper way, which meant, they explained, in person from the clan, not from Marin alone. They had brought a chest. They set it on the table without ceremony. Inside it were things Edric did not have names for: carefully stoppered glass bottles, small wrapped parcels of dried medicines tied with colored cord, a folded packet of drawing salve that they explained was for burns, which a blacksmith might find useful, and at the bottom, a set of tongs made from a metal he had never seen, so finely balanced they felt alive in his hand. "From our own smith," the iron-haired woman said. "She wanted you to have them." Edric turned them over in his hands. The workmanship was extraordinary. "I only gave her supper and a dry place to sit," he said. "I don't need payment for that." "We know," said the iron-haired woman. "That is why we are here." Marin came herself a week after that. She came without ceremony, just the worn satchel and a basket over one arm, and she knocked at the smithy door with the same 3 quiet raps. He recognized them at once. This time he had been expecting her. He had put on the kettle already. She spent 2 days at the crossroads. She looked in on Beryl, declared him much improved, and adjusted the remedy. She went to see Pell's wife, whose fever had resolved but who had been left with a cough that troubled her. She looked at the miller's boy's healing arm and approved of how it was set. She did not announce herself. She simply walked through the village with her basket and her satchel and helped the people who were there to be helped. Some of them looked at her sideways. Most of them, by the end of the 2nd day, simply thanked her and asked when she would be back through. On the evening of the 2nd day, she sat again at Edric's workbench with a bowl of soup. He had made the venison stew again, the same recipe, and they talked for a long time about remedies, and about the northern ranges where she had collected her medicines, and about the quality of the comfrey root from the valley versus the highlands, and about Beryl, who was asleep on her feet. Before she left in the morning, she told him her route: the northern ranges in late summer, the eastern valleys in autumn, the river settlements in spring. She passed his crossroads twice a year. Edric said that the forge was always warm, and there was always supper. She stood for a moment in the doorway, the same doorway she'd stood in 6 weeks before, not sure whether she was wanted. Then she looked at him with those careful, steady eyes, and something in them was different now. Not guarded, just quiet and warm and real. "I'll be back in spring," she said. "I know," said Edric. "I'll put the kettle on." He watched her go down the road, the satchel over her shoulder, the basket on her arm, until the trees took her. Then he turned back to his forge, and the fire in it was still going, and the tongs on his workbench were extraordinary, and Beryl's leg didn't hurt any more. It was, he thought, a pretty good start. The Crossroads village did not have much to commend it: a dozen buildings, a muddy main road, a well that ran slow in summer. But that winter, when people asked Edric why he seemed easier in himself than he had in years, he did not have a precise answer. Only that the forge was warm, and the tongs on his workbench were remarkable, and Beryl slept without favoring his leg, and somewhere in the northern ranges a healer with a patched cloak and a careful knock was moving through the cold with her satchel, heading, in spring, back this way.